for this convene. That takes us to item 1, Mr. Chair. Can you claim a card with the CLA's office? Item 1 is a motion, City of Bloomfield, relative to instructing the Housing Department to report to the Committee on Federal Housing and Allocate decision to direct the GSEs to invest in the Housing Trust Fund.
Hi, good afternoon, council members. My name is Fernanda Monterrosa, and I'm from the Housing and Community Investment Department. I'm here today to give you a little bit of an overview on the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. By way of the brief background, this was actually enacted through the Housing and Economic Recovery Act of 2008, known as the HERA Act. And funding was supposed to be coming from Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, the GSEs, or the government enterprise entities. In 2008, because of the banking industry crisis and foreclosure crisis, those payments were stopped. So since 2008, the National Housing Trust Fund has never been funded. And there have been many efforts nationwide to figure out a way to pressure the release of that funding to fund that program. HUD actually published its proposed regulations to carry out the National Housing Trust Fund on October 29, 2010. In January 30th of this year, HUD published its interim regulations for the trust fund. These are going to be enforceable and will be effective starting on March 31st of this year. HUD does intend to open this interim rule for public comment and to solicit comments once the first round of funding is made available and once grantees have had a little bit more of an experience to handle this funding stream. So another brief information that I'd like to also share with you is that on December 11th, 2014, the Federal Housing Finance Agency director lifted that suspension because the economic crisis is actually no longer in place. Funds will become available to the trust fund beginning 60 days after the end of this year. So sometime in early 2016, the fund will actually start being funded. HUD estimates that the funds will be allocated beginning in the summer of 2016. So the interim rule requires the funding to be distributed by formula to each state. And this distribution formula is based on 4 factors based on need. And those include rental housing available for extremely low income families, rental housing available to very low income families, overcrowding, living standard conditions, unaffordable units in a particular state, and the 4th one is unaffordable units in a particular state. Each state is going to be receiving a minimum of $3 million. That is the minimum allocation for each state. And if the fund does not state at minimum, each state. So right now, one of the things that we've been following this very closely, and there are various estimates of how much money is actually going to become available by 2016. And so the ranges from $250 million to $500 million, but the Obama newly released precedent budget estimates it at $120 million nationwide. So based on those estimates, if the trust fund was funded at $250 million nationwide, the state of California will get approximately $29.9 million. If it was funded at $500 million, it will be $82 million. And if it would be at $120 million, which is right now in the current budget for the president's budget, it will be $15 million approximately coming to the state of California. 15, right. These funding amounts will not be settled until we know, probably sometime next year. So the interim rule allows states to allocate funds to sub-grantees. So the way that this program is going to work is that the states will have to designate an administrative agency. So, for instance, the state of California could actually designate the Housing and Community Development Department as the administrating agency. but they would actually have to follow the consolidated plan process. They would have to do a substantial amendment, and they would open it up for public comment, and they can then direct or figure out how they want to expend the funding and distribute it to all the localities within the state. The regulations require that both rental and homeownership is to be affordable for a minimum of 30 years, but a longer term period can actually be established. At least 90% of the trust fund dollars are to be used to produce, preserve, rehabilitate, or operate rental housing. Up to 10% may be used for home ownership activities. At least 75% of this money is to be utilized for rental housing to benefit extremely low-income households. That's less than 30% of the area median income. And that's the bulk of the money. No more than 25% of the state's trust fund money is to be used to rent for rental housing to benefit very low-income households. And there is a threshold in the interim rule that when the trust fund is less than $1 billion nationwide, 100% of those dollars need to benefit the extremely low-income families. And if there is more than $1 billion, a minimum of 75% must be spent on ELI or extremely low-income households. So the National Trust Fund can be used for loans, including no-interest loans and deferred payment loans, grants, interest subsidies, equity investments, other forms of financing, and states and any local sub-grantee may decide the terms of this assistance. So one of the things that I wanted to also highlight is that there's a lot going on right now, both at the national level and about to start at the state level. So these are the interim rules, and there will be an opportunity to start having a discussion at the federal, at the nationwide level with other nationwide organizations. And so we will be watching that very carefully to see how that operates and continues to move forward. The key aspect will be the work here in the state. Assembly Speaker Tony Atkins introduced AB 90, which is a spot bill that actually directs the Housing and Community Development Department to be the designated entity to distribute these funds. The hearings have not been scheduled for any of this, but it's something that we would have to spend time to closely monitor, because that's a bill that would enable for the state to establish the structure. So that is a really key aspect of this work. Regardless of the money that's maybe available nationwide, if the money were to increase to $1 billion, we would still have to have a structure where the state would have to, deploy the funding. So, as next steps, we will continue to monitor AB 90. The hearings for that will probably take place sometime at the end of March or April of this year. Nationwide, there are a lot of conferences and a lot of different working groups looking at this nationally. In addition, at the end of January, one Republican congressperson actually introduced a bill to kill or to stop payment from the GSEs to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. So I'm not sure how much movement there will actually be on that, but that's something that we'll also be watching carefully. So that's the overview of the National Housing Trust Fund, and I'm sorry to say that it's not a lot of money available for that at this moment.
No? So about two possibilities in the AB 90 money?
So AB 90... So AB 90 would be the enabling legislation to establish the structure to deploy the funding that the state gets from the National Housing Trust Fund.
So we're about 40% of that, so whatever the number is.
There's no direct allocation right now for local jurisdictions. That would have to be established by state law. So right now, the formula is based on need, and it's given directly to the states. The states then need to make the decision.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Motion to send to council. Yeah, we might get the right legal phrase here.
I'd make a motion.
Motion to send to council. So moved. Motion by Price.
Mr. Chair, did you still want housing to report back, or are you receiving and filing the motion?
Yeah, how about 6 months?
Sure.
Right. Give a sense what's going on in the fall.
Okay. Thank you. That brings us to item number 2. Item 2 is Housing Department to report relative to the Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities Program.
Council members, Dora Huerta with the Office of the Chief Legislative Analyst. This last committee's meeting, our offices presented an update on the Affordable Housing and Sustainable Community Programs status, its recently adopted guidelines, the application process, and the process by which, we presented on the Affordable Housing and Sustainable Community Program. The committee instructed us to study, to coordinate a working group with all relevant departments and report back on a potential list of projects that the city could support for state funding. In addition to coordinating with internal city departments, we were also asked to work with outside entities, including Metro and SCAG, that may have an interest in the Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities Program. The program, which is funded by cap and trade proceeds, will award funds to reduce greenhouse emissions through projects that support infill and compact development. At this point, we'd like to present you with an update on where we are with the process. As mentioned during our last meeting, the Strategic Growth Council is moving forward with a very compressed timeline, with the NOFA being released January 30th and concept proposals due February 19th. By March 11th, eligible applicants will be invited to submit full applications. And full applications are due to the council by April, with awards expected by late June. So March 11th is when eligible applicants will be invited to submit full applications. This will be due by April 15th, and then awards will be announced in late June. Given the time constraints, the working group that we brought together has moved quickly to identify a set of criteria for us to review projects this year, with a commitment to continue to monitor the program and refine the criteria in future years. Given that the $120 million allocated for this year's program is expected to double next year, the working group plans to work together to align city projects and resources to better prepare projects that are not recommended this year for future year applications. Last week, the Strategic Growth Council held a workshop which our departments attended. The workshop itself was very, very well attended by developers and other city reps. We did learn that that projects that are awarded within the city boundaries, which, as you know, the cap is $15 million. The cap applies to all projects within the city boundaries, whether they be developers, outside developers, Metro. Any project that is awarded within the city all contributes toward that $15 million cap, which is more the reason for us to coordinate with other partners in the area. Two types of projects that can be funded include transit-oriented departments and integrated connectivity projects. The main difference between these is that ICPs do not have to include housing and cannot be served by qualifying high-quality transit. Internally, since our last meeting, we held a meeting with representatives from the Mayor's Office, Department of Transportation, the Mayor's Riverworks Group, and the Housing Authority, HACLA. We developed a set of criteria, which we've passed out today. And we'd like to go over the criteria and a list of projects that were identified, potential funding, and our support. criteria that the working group identified for your consideration include, at minimum, that the projects presented meet the cost of proposal requirements. We'd like to know that these projects are eligible and competitive for funding as a minimum requirement. Also, that they are one of our housing department's priority. So I guess I'll speak to that a little more. Also, that they are in disadvantaged communities and that they meet some of the citywide and departmental objectives and priorities.
So as you can see, this is a preliminary project list based on all the different conversations with Metro and the different city departments, as well as a review of our managed pipeline. And the collective request amount is over $61 million. Of course, these are going to be subject to see if they actually do meet the minimum concept proposal criteria as established by the guidelines. And the CLA has established a deadline for submission and clarification of this for tomorrow at noon. Tomorrow at noon. These applications are due next Thursday, so there's very little time, and there's a holiday coming in between. So, and the application is very involved, and it does require some technical assistance from the SGC staff to be able to fully submit that proposal. In addition to that, one of the things that we've discussed is that we want to ensure that these applications are competitive, have a very good likelihood of being invited to apply for the full application. So I don't know if you have any questions in particular for these projects, or we can describe the criteria.
Yes.
This is something that I don't have a lot of details on. The Department of Transportation has asked us to consider this and to include it, but we will be receiving their full background or project description on this by tomorrow.
So, I mean, I think you've heard me before about the managed pipeline. I understand that you have to add some screens in order for us to be competitive in the most well-placed position. But again, the glaring thing that seems to me is the Northeast San Fernando Valley, not just Council District 7, but you don't see 6 in here. And there are pockets of 2 that I think would also be very good for this type of project. So I understand. I'm unhappy, but I understand because the managed pipeline is filtered, and that's how we're going to access some of this SGC money. So that's my statement. My question is, so the $61 million is what we're going to go and request. So this is the list. I mean, we know that the cap, at least at this point, is $15 million. And it was reported last time that you all were here that there is a hope that there will be some flexibility in the awards to accommodate the size of Los Angeles. But this is the list. This is what we intend to ask for, the $61 million.
This is what we have right now, and the intent is that we will have a revised, refined list by next week when we hear back from all the different departments.
By the 19th.
Right, before the 19th. So it may be a little bit less, or it may be more, but this is what we have right now through all the filtering and discussions that we've engaged with. And I think the other thing to consider is that there are some really critical limitations to the guidelines as they're crafted right now. And so one of the things that we've discussed internally is that we need to take this opportunity to move forward and identify what those deficiencies are and really push forward to open the guidelines again before the second NOFA is issued. There was not a lot of time to prepare for these projects or to have these projects ready, given that a lot of the details were not revealed until maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago. Even the scoring criteria for the GHG emissions, that was not really issued until 2 weeks ago. So people have not had time to really digest or to even prepare the best and most opportune projects that will maximize the leverage of other ongoing investment in the city. This also heavily relies on transit-oriented development, and I think that there's a real good opportunity to explore corridors, project areas that we did not really have a chance to explore at this time. So I think some of this may be a good indication for the second round if some of these don't meet the criteria for the concept proposal submittal, so that we can start working collectively as a city to get the best projects and most coverage in the city. We did win on changing the definition for transit, so that is a very liberal definition. I think we need to take advantage of that and figure out and identify those projects that take advantage of that definition. And so I think that's what I can respond to you in terms of how this is shaping up. I mean, these are the projects that we have that now meet the current criteria.
And so, I mean, and so now with my sort of citywide hat on, so we're going to ask for whatever our pro rata share ought to be, hoping that one day in the future we'll get more than 15 million. I forget what the number was. We should be shooting for about 30 or 40
about
million?
30%. We do have 26% of the entire disadvantaged communities census tracts in the city of Los Angeles.
And the total is 120 million?
The total for this funding amount, yes, is $120 million.
So we should be shooting for at least 31 million there.
Right, and we do have, the SGC did say they can waive that $50 million cap in order to meet the statutory requirement.
No, and we're hopeful that they'll do that. So the other sort of thing that, just to remind ourselves, here, the applicant here, it says developer, this is co-application?
The only co-applicant here so far is Metro, the Metro. Everything else is developer-driven.
So understanding that we also want to figure out how to have more control over these projects and do co-application, will we be supporting projects that we're not co-applicants on?
On this list, all of them would be support letters.
Even though we're not
co-applicants.
Okay, all right. So
Yes.
it makes me nervous to go down a path where we have a cap on the money, and then the other principle that we wanted to adhere to is co-application, and here we're supporting developer applicants, not co-applicants with the city of Los Angeles. So I just sort of want to note it because I don't want us to get into the same sort of routine, the practice. The other sort of observation that I have here too is the managed pipeline process is really driving this. I think that's important and better as soon as we amend it. But I also get the sense that the Southern California Association of Government, SCAG, has done a lot of preliminary work. Are they memorialized in any of this stuff? I know that one of the actions here is to enter into an MOU with them. What value will that bring for us from a competitive perspective, but also from a project perspective, understanding that the pipeline is sort of the way that we're trying to concentrate our resources?
We did reach out to SCAG, and we did have a very good meeting with them, and they are completely open to continue to work with us and coordinate certain aspects of the work. Now, they are precluding from actually entering into a formal MOU with us because they have a direct role in evaluating and reviewing applications. So what we discussed is that they can provide technical assistance to the applicants for future NOFA allocations.
So we wouldn't be able to negotiate between them and LA Metro and us.
Not the three entities, but with Metro we can, and we've also engaged in a discussion with them. Had 2 meetings in the last week and a half, and they're amenable and looking forward to entering into an MOU with the city to specifically tackle this program, so that we can actually coordinate the cost of projects or set criteria for the new funding round. As you may be aware, Metro did issue a memo to their own constituency, like a call for projects for this program, and they did receive about 20 or so inquiries, and out of all those, they are selecting 3 that meet the criteria, and there's overlap on 3 of them. That is MacArthur B, Path, and Roland Curtis. So those are the ones that they're going to be issuing a letter of support, but they are actually a co-applicant for Metro B. And they just made that decision yesterday. And so the immediate next steps will be to continue to work with them very diligently, not only on coordinating the projects, but also at the state level to ensure that this money is serving the purpose of and the intent of the law.
Sure. So let me come back to sort of the applicants and the proposed projects, understanding that you're going to take a closer look at them. But there isn't a single one here that represents the San Fernando Valley, with the exception of 3, which is tentative and it has 0 housing units. And so realizing that we are going to be supportive of developers and not co-applying, what can I do to be helpful in identifying projects that would, as much as I would love them in the 7th Councilmata District, 40% of the city is in the San Fernando Valley. Are there no projects or developers out there that we know of that will be applying for some of this funding in this round? There's got to be at least one.
Really?
You name it in the valley, wherever you want. It's 40% of the city of Los Angeles, 460 square miles. There's got to be something.
I'm sure there are a few out there, and this is the list that we have based on the priority income, that based on the projects that we know that have submitted requests to the department. What we're shooting for is, once we open up the couple projects again, we haven't had this conversation, but we will as soon as we schedule it, is going back to opening up the city on a wider level to reach out to the valley in a better way. And that will be obvious when we come back with that policy. And once that happens, I think that the best thing that the city council folks from those areas can do is really encourage our developers to submit proposals to us, and they will be part of the managed pipeline, and they'll appear here. They'll appear here in the next round.
Now, these aren't.
Could you state your name?
I'm sorry, Manuel Bernal, Director of Housing there.
Mr. Bernal, so this is part of the list for the managed pipeline.
It is.
Right.
I would tell you that the first few are, yes.
Right. Okay. And so I think what would be helpful, and I don't know, Mr. Chair, sort of what will happen next, but understanding that it may be too late for this round, as displeasing as that could be to me and the rest of the San Fernando Valley, it'd be helpful to understand whether you have anything in the queue that's in the San Fernando Valley. I erroneously have only been focusing on the 7th District, understanding that there's some built-in challenges to getting into the pipeline, but this is beginning to let me believe that there might be a broader problem in the valley, and I understand that it's a different sort of landscape, and maybe there isn't sort of the concentration, but I have to imagine that there's TOD opportunities out there.
Yes.
And managed pipeline priorities.
There are.
So I would love to figure out how to have you all report back on what the pipeline list looks like, including those that are tentative or in concept, because, again, it doesn't have to be pro rata, but there's got to be something.
Okay.
Let me,
It's not the first time we've said this.
Well, to be fair, it's the first time that I've looked at the 7th Council District, but now sort of looking at what's, and to be fair to the department, this is the first cut, and this is the most ready.
Right.
I'm being nice to the department. But there's got to be a list, and there's got to be some hope that there's going to be some more there that actually is out in the San Fernando Valley.
right, and so let's couple that with the comments made by the senator, because I've heard this before, and you know, we should not be overlooking the districts in the valley. They have the same profile, they have the same people, they're all Angelenos, and they still have the same incredible need. And yet, because of our design of TOD and where we have transit centers, etc., they should not be penalized as a result of that. So we look to you to make that happen, right? Wait a minute. We look here, and the senator raised this point. Cyclists are 1% of the budget, cyclists are 1% of the motor going public, and yet in this budget they are taking like 13% budget, right? 13, 14%. I don't know what the exact number is, and yet so we have a group that's 1%, they're taking 13%. You have another group that's 40%, and they don't get any part of the budget. That's just inequitable. That's just unfair. I don't know how to fix it, but I trust that you guys do, and that there should be a report that comes back and tells us how we got into the scenario and how we can get out of it, right? So that we can have that type of equity throughout the city.
If I may add, I think that's one of the goals of the working group that we have, that the CLA has established, is to explore new opportunities and really take advantage of the breadth of opportunities that this funding actually presents for mobility-driven projects connected to housing. And it does require a broader view, but it does take a coordinated effort to do that. And I think that now that we're in this stage, preparing for the second round and really taking a close look at what is the city working on from Bureau of Street Services, from DOT, from our department, planning, all those entities, city agencies can actually take advantage of this funding. But it's really coordinating those efforts.
I just want to also amplify the comments of my colleagues. That we just desire for more equity. I don't want all the affordable housing projects in a night, but you expect to see one on this list,
right?
Particularly along the blue line. I know there's some CRA properties that are coming back on the market, but we got to be creative. We got to be, I think, aggressive and very committed to identifying those areas that are in need and that the resources are flowing there.
Yep.
Not just other parts of the area. And again, I'm not knocking the pipeline, but I'm just concerned that it's not reflecting the total need that exists here in South LA and in the Valley and in other parts.
Yep.
If I may add, there's very stringent requirements. You have to have NEPA, all those clearances, and you have to have the funding commitment. There's a whole slew of minimum criteria, and those are the ones that rose to the top. So this is not the extent of the managed pipeline, but these are the ones that meet that minimum.
Well, I'd also be interested to see that the rest of the list, as we're developing this pipeline, what's coming and who we.
That actually might be helpful. I'm forgetting when we had the last sort of committee report on sort of the pipeline. I want to say it was in the fall or the summer of last year, but I don't remember off the top of my head. But to be fair, I think that Mr. Price is absolutely right in that I think the pipeline tells a tremendous story. I just want to make sure that sort of what's in the pipeline is reflective of the entire sort of city, and I imagine that it is. But it just happens to be good or bad luck here that all of these projects meet the criteria, and this is sort of what rose. But I still maintain that the pipeline is incredibly important because it is what will position projects to be more successful, and then it's the ability to leverage the pipeline with opportunities like this that increase our success. I just need to understand what's downriver in the inlet of the pipe, as hoping that it makes its way out of it one day.
Well, I just want to point out that, like Claudia said, this is really a subset of what we have in terms of the pipeline. There are other projects that are actually that are not here, but they're getting funded some other way. I mean, we just recently funded Washington, and then right in front of the blue line, that's going 100% funded. It's going to start construction. We just recently funded out in Winnetka, and they're starting construction outside of this specific pot. So there are other projects out there that are moving in that direction. So so we can come back actually when we come back, hopefully in about 2 weeks, to open up the couple projects. We can present a kind of the wider picture of all the projects that we have and our route to get them done.
Mr. Fuentes, you have an appointment. We were scheduled to hear on the pipeline today, but as you know, children, a lot of people have been sick. Let's make that for the next meeting work. And when, are you guys going to be ready in the next meeting or in 2 weeks? 2 weeks? Thank you, Mr. Fuentes. Pick one, 2 weeks or next week. What works for you? Yes. Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you guys very much. And then finally,
This item is continued for 1 week.
yep.
That takes us to item number 3.
And number 3, we get a city attorney. Oh,
Yeah, which is a, the committee may recess into closed session for this item. It's a city attorney report regarding the city versus advanced development and investment. The item description on the agenda is inaccurate. This report is actually a settlement involving third-party equity investor PNC and the city regarding the Menlo Park development bond.
So look, I don't want to deny anybody an opportunity to speak, but I also want to be respectful of your time and presence here. There is a significant amount of people who are here for the Rita Walters Center. And let me say to you that we are committed to funding that center, that I've spoken to Ms. Walters, who is a friend and a mentor. Both the council members are committed to funding it, and we are just working on how to move that forward. And so I want everybody to have confidence in that, that we have a commitment to move forward. I've spoken to Councilmember Parks, to Councilmember Price, and we're committed to that. So you should know that. I spoke to Ms. Walters last week, and we had an ability to spend some time together. And we are, of course, committed to funding it. Our goal is to maintain it at its funding level, and that's our intention. And so, if there is a representative, you're all welcome to speak, but we have a closed session to go into with our attorneys on a settlement. So I don't want all of you waiting around and not being able to be heard. At the same time, I want to give you guys an opportunity to speak, but if there's a way that we could have a spokesperson or 1 or 2 spokespersons to come up, but speak to us knowing the context that this body, this chair, this member, and the council are committed to protecting this fine institution. Okay. Okay. My dear, what is your name?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
we are moving from item 3 to general public comment.
Yes. Thank you. Okay, my dear, you can speak on behalf. We've got 1, 2, and 3 speakers for the center. You are, what was your name again, sweetie? Deja Henry. And you are?
Deja Gordon.
Deja Gordon. Okay. And? Thank you, Doctor. Okay. So, let's hear from you.
I just wanted to say that I wanted to keep our center because without our center, we will be outside in the cold in the air, and the parents would not like their kids to get sick. So I really wanted to keep our center.
Thank you.
I want to save our center so we can have a peaceful place to practice, and so we can feel, when we practicing, we can feel joy, and we don't have to worry about anything else except practicing. So I really want to save Bitter Waters.
So what are you practicing?
Juti.
Hmm?
Juti.
Joking, okay. Doctor.
Well, I want to save our center too,
Yes.
and I'd like to save it for a number of reasons. One of which is that the Children's Collective was actively involved in creating the center and all the activities that it took to create the center. We were part of the program planning, we were part of the architectural design team, and for the last 13 years, we have actually operated programs there, including the drill team program. I am delighted to hear that you're in support of what we came to ask you to support. I'd like to say very briefly, because I realize a lot of folks aren't that familiar with the Rita Walters Center or the Children's Collective work there. There are 4 major things that we do for the community, and those include education, and that is recovering dropouts, that's the Rita Walters School part, as well as the Child Care Center and after school. We recently built out, using our money, along with city money, a health clinic there, because the issues of access to health care are still very, very strong in that community. We do classes for parents as well as for children, because one of our key goals is family unification and reunification. We're trying to keep families together. And because of that reason, we're doing classes in anger management, classes in parenting, helping with financial literacy, and ultimately, we're trying to move beyond what initiated the creation of the center to begin with. The center came about because of the persistent poverty, the long-term poverty in the community after the civil unrest.
Sure.
We're still working on those issues, and we appreciate the opportunity to continue that work.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Can I ask, Doctor, how many students or families are you serving there at that facility?
Well, we've actually got, there are 3 basic entities. There is the high school, and the high school recovers about 350 dropouts every year. These are kids who can't graduate anywhere else. There is the Youth and Family Center, which we operate, and we have about 510 clients and about 2,200 other people that we serve in what we call safety net services. Then there's the Child Care Center, which has about 80 infants, toddlers, and preschoolers, and another 120 parents who are allowed to get jobs to be employed because there's someplace.
Does the collective run that program also?
Yeah. Oh, we operate. Yes. And there's a building, Rita Walters Child Care Center there, in addition to the school.
And who operates the clinic? Who runs the clinic?
The health clinic,
Health clinic.
the health clinic right now, we're under negotiation with HUMA. And this is one of
Yes, I'm not going to get very technical here, but as a parent, I'm a parent of a preschooler who attends the Rita Walters Child Care and the Center. And it's been a tremendous blessing for us, for me personally, in terms of just Child Care Center providing that for families, early childhood preparation, preparing them for higher level, grades. So, but on a broader scale, the way I see this too, I look at the long-term investment. I see it as you're outlining the programs that are offered. I'm kind of recently coming on board, and I'm seeing, just paying close attention and observing, the programs and what their benefits are. And I look at this also as a long-term investment in terms of the anger management programs, the various things that are offered to families, because there's a lot of dysfunction. There's a lot of challenges that are happening in our city, in our community. And so I look at this as, okay, I'm preparing my child for his future. So if we cut these type of, and I understand, I heard what you said as far as you're doing everything within your power to keep the funding going and, within a certain reasonable. So I want you to please allow your conscience to be your guide as well. I know this is a money matter at times because it's funding, but if you're grandparents, if you're a parent, youth right now, this is our future generation. And you've all had training, you've all had education to get at this place and this level in your life. And so we need to be able to afford that opportunity for our children as well. So these programs, I believe, help to alleviate some of the challenges that we're facing with anger and violence and all these things that are actually causing a lot of these problems and actually preventing them from receiving the education that they need. So we need these programs, and we need what you guys are offering for us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. That concludes public comment?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
We're now returning to item number 3.
And finally, item number 3. Thank you, everybody who came down here. I didn't want you to be waiting for our meeting with our attorney. Thank you. Item number 3.
Item number 3 is a city attorney report regarding the case Advanced Development Incorporated versus the city.
Mr. Chair, did you wish to go into closed session at this time? Yep. Okay. This committee is now recessing into closed session pursuant to Government Code Section 4956.9D1 to confer with its legal counsel. We are back in open session, and for the record, the committee approved the recommendation in the city attorney report.
That clear our agenda.
That clears the desk.
There's a desk. Is there a motion to adjourn, Senator? Okay, so be the order.